good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Meghna, and I'm delighted to be your host along with Parag Bhai. We're both delighted to be your host for this closing conversation in our Law of Love webinar series commemorating Gandhiji's 152nd birthday. So, welcome and thank you for joining us. The purpose of these calls is to share stories that help plant seeds of compassionate society while we foster our own inner transformation. And we do this by holding conversations with guests from all walks of life whose inspiring journeys inspire us to live in a more service oriented way. And behind each of these calls is an entire team of service based volunteers whose invisible work allows us to hold this space. So today, our special guest is Gary Zukav, and I'm personally very delighted to be in conversation with him. But before we do that, we will begin with a minute of silence as we anchor ourselves in this space. So thank you for joining us. Thank you. And welcome again to our Law of Love webinar series. And I feel so honored to be in this special conversation with a very special person who I have met a few times to explore the potential of cultivating a space of our own groundedness. Gary Zukav, who has dedicated his entire life to cultivating that sacred space of love within and has inspired with his message of love outside to millions. As we start our conversations, if at any point you'd like to ask a question, please submit it via the comment box on our live stream page, or you can also email us at ask@servicespace.org. But before we introduce our speaker, I would like to invite two other very special friends, Rahul and Kinnadi, to share an opening prayer for our gathering.
Hello. Good morning, Meghna and Parag Bhai, and good evening to you, Gary. It is such a joy to see you this morning here in India. And as I was thinking about this Awaken conversation this morning, it occurred to me that the word Gary Zukav, in the language that's spoken here in India, Gary is a variant of Gehri, which is deep, and Zukav is like bowing down. So in a way, Gehre se jukna means Gary Zukav. So I would say a Gary Zukav here to you, Gary. And this is how we would like to start this offering. This song is Vaishnava Janato. It's a Gujarati song by the 15th century poet Saint Narsi Mehta. He hails from Gujarat and he speaks of the characteristics of Vaishnava Jana, which is the people or the followers of Lord Vishnu. But it should not be just taken literally as the followers of Lord Vishnu, because the characteristics he speaks about, Narsi describes, are actually the characteristics of Sthita Pragya, or the person established in his true intelligence, as described in the Bhagavad Gita, or the universal man, as you describe in your book, Gary. So here is our attempt to translate this bhajan that Gandhiji, it was one of his favorites. And he used to, this was a part of ashram bhajanavali, which is a roster of songs at the Sabarmati ashrams, the prayers that were sung every day sequentially. So here is our attempt to translate and then to sing this offering as we start this Law of Love dialogue. One who is a true Vaishnava truly understands the pain of others. When she does others good, she does so effortlessly in a flow, without pride entering her mind. She holds all beings in reverence. She does not speak ill of others. Her speech, actions, and thoughts are aligned with the loving parts of her personality. She is a blessing to the world as she shows us the light. He sees everything with equanimity, lets go of greed and avarice, regards all other women as his own mother, never utters a falsehood. has no interest in claiming anything that is not his own. And if you think about it, what is it on this planet which is truly our own, as we are all in transit? A true Vaishnava neither succumbs to worldly attachments nor games the world for her benefit. Having given up anger and all desires, she views the world with a blessed detachment. As she resonates with the unstruck sound of Ram, the word, the chant that even Gandhi ji had a deep connection with, as she resonates with this unstruck sound, she rediscovers all shrines within her own body. And then there is no need to travel even a single step outward, as the fountain of holiness is within our own bodies. In your words, Gary, such a person rediscovers her non-physical reality.
वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे पीड़ पराई जाने रे। वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे पीड़ पराई जाने रे। पर दुखे उपकार करे तोए, पर दुखे उपकार करे तोए, मन अभिमान नाणे रे। वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे पीड़ पराई जाने रे।
सकल
लोक मां सहुने वंदे, निंदा न करे के नीरे। वाच काच मन निश्चल राखे, धन धन जननी तेनी रे। वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे समदृष्टि ने तृष्णा त्यागी, पर स्त्री जेने मात रे। जिह्वा थकी असत्य न बोले, पर धन नव जाली हाथ रे। वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे पीड़ पराई जाने रे। वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे पीड़ पराई जाने रे।
Thank you, Rahul and Kinnari, for this powerful prayer. It is one of my special prayers as well. Thank you. Our guest today needs no introduction. I think all of us have read about his journey and his remarkable work that he has done in the world. Gary Zukav. But I'm just going to recap a little of his formal introduction for all of us. Gary Zukav has been an author of 4 consecutive New York Times bestsellers, including books like The Dancing Woolly Masters and The Seat of the Soul. 6 million copies of his books have been published in over 32 languages. And his most recent book is Universal Human, which is also the seed of this conversation today. Gary has touched millions of lives, particularly with his appearances, 36 appearances on the Oprah Winfrey Show. Wow. And he's right here with us. My personal favorite memory of Gary when I met him about 3 years ago was when he visited our home as a part of a circle in a retreat. And in my naivety, I just mentioned to him that you remind me of my grandfather. And his response was a very humble, "Oh, I am honored to be reminded of him." And of course, it was followed by a very warm grandfatherly hug. To me, that speaks volumes of his warmth and his genuine groundedness that instantly connects you to his heart without any boundaries of fame or achievement. So once again, thank you, Carrie, for saying yes to be in this conversation with us from your living room to all of ours. So before we start the official questions and interviews, I wanted to ask, how is your heart doing?
My heart is filled with joy. I remember that moment exactly, Meghna, and I am still honored that I reminded you of your grandfather, because you said that with such devotion to your grandfather that I could feel some of it. It was a wonderful moment. My heart is good. And thank you, Kinari and Rahul, for that beautiful sharing. It also happens to be one of my favorite sharings. And I think that it is something that I aspire for continually. And I think that it is something that, as any individual becomes more aware in his or her life, becomes more joyful when they hear that prayer. Joyful because of how accurate it is and how beautifully it's expressed. And that's where we're headed. We don't have to be Hindu. We just have to be humans.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you for presencing being human. It's incredibly powerful. So as we start our conversation today, we wanted to go back a little early in time and talk about your early life. You were born in a very humble family. You had an incredible education at the Harvard University, during your junior year, you decided to skip a year, take a break for a year, and take a motorcycle journey across 3 continents. And then you come back to volunteer for anti-racism causes, which you were deeply moved by. And after graduating, you join the army as a Green Beret officer. Speaking of that time in the army in particular, we have often heard you share that you had a very macho personality. And then, as we know, as we follow the trajectory of your life, we've seen that it has taken very interesting curves and different directions. So when we have heard you say, over many conversations, we've also actually have heard you say that these early life choices were coming from a space of lack of worthiness. Can you speak a bit about that and what caused you to recognize that and change direction?
Of course. I want to suggest something to all of our listeners. As I speak, as Meghna and Parag speak, look at what is meaningful to you. Use what I'm saying to you tonight as an example to experiment with, because we'll be sharing many things, many stories, many experiences, but those that are especially meaningful to you are those that can take you in a direction that's beneficial to you. Not because they're my experiences, but because they will show you your experiences in a similar way, even though your experiences will always be as unique as snowflakes. No experiences in the Earth School are random. And as you recognize that an experience is meaningful to you, whether it's something that someone says or something that you hear or something that you see, that's where your transformation can begin. Well, the next step for you is to apply what you have seen as meaningful to you and not let it slip away as a good feeling that was transient. Meaning is your compass. And when this compass points in a direction, you experience that as something meaningful. So use your life as an experiment. And when you register meaning, move in that direction. That's what I've done. When something registered as meaningful in me, I experiment with it. I've set my intention to pay attention to it. I have followed it. I have seen what and how I can do to apply it in my life. And in this way, I have been able to transform my life in significant ways. If I hadn't done these things, if I hadn't put my attention, my focus, my will on bringing into my life what was meaningful to me and what I registered as meaningful, I would not have changed. And you would not have been as interested in what I have to say as you are now. So when I speak of my early life, it's one of pain, emotional pain. My family was lower middle class. My parents were loving. My father provided us with all that he could, which was enough money for me to go to Harvard on a scholarship and my sister to go to a university also. But I never felt connected to anyone at any time for anything. And the world intimidated me. And so I was always looking at the ground like this. So as you can probably assume, I never saw very much, but I heard a lot, and all of it frightened me. And this is an odd thing. It seemed that I was popular with students in my small school because they elected me as president of the student council. They sent me to something called Boys State, which was an honor. And I was also on the state debate championship team. I loved to debate. I didn't have any real values of my own. I could argue affirmative and negative about any proposition and doing it and do it well. That's how I got so many trophies. That's how the team I was on, I contributed to getting so many trophies, but I loved debate. I was passionate. I was purely an opportunist, but I couldn't even think in those terms then. So I was a young boy in Kansas, which is a rural state in the United States. And I'm always amazed at my life, because if I hadn't done anything to change it, I could have been a 50-year-old yard boy pushing a lawnmower. But things did attract me. Someone in our small town had gone to Harvard. I was probably a first. And he told me about Harvard. And I thought, well, why not go there? Why not apply for it? I really didn't think of it as some people really want to get into Harvard. I just thought, well, I'll try it. So I applied and I got a scholarship. That was because I came from a small town in Kansas, just when Harvard was transiting from a Eastern finishing school for very wealthy families into a national university. And they needed me because I was valedictorian of my class. But what I discovered is that although I was in the top 1 or 2 percentile of my class in Kansas, I was at the bottom 1 or 2 percentile in my class at Harvard. That was a jolt. I don't know why it was a jolt. It was a jolt because I was just used to always having an easy way with academics. Harvard wasn't like that. So already you can start to see some things that I want to share with you. If I hadn't followed this hunch, why not apply for this school? I might still be in Kansas, but I did. And I started to learn things as I went through this school. And then I joined the Army. And I joined the Army because I was so needful. I needed to be admired. I needed to be valued. I was probably the only person at Harvard that had posters of paratroopers on my room wall, jumping out of an airplane. But I became one of those. And this sense of other, everything else being other, was with me all the time. I saw dead bodies in Khartoum during the Tet Offensive, which was a major defeat for the US military in 1968. And the stench was so bad, we all needed to put handkerchiefs over our noses, wet handkerchiefs. But I couldn't feel sorrow. I couldn't feel anything. It's just what happened to them. And so I'm sharing all of this just to give you a picture of where I was when my journey started. But who knows when a journey starts? Who knows how many lifetimes contributed to my being born into a family in Texas that then moved to Kansas. And that, after I got out of the Army, I wound up moving to San Francisco. And that is the first time that my life began to change. I got to San Francisco again because I just felt like it. I was in Florida. I was searching for sunken treasure off one of the Florida Keys. And there were 12 of us on this boat and some other people that were always raising money to pay for the boat and us. And they weren't paying us much, that's for sure. But they were offering us a little share of the treasure we were looking for, which was gold bullion from a Spanish ship that sank in 1733. We didn't find it. But I felt Florida was not the place for me. It just didn't feel as good as I wanted to feel. And so I just drove across the United States, and it's a big place. And I kept driving west because I was as far east as I could begin. And I kept driving until I ran into the ocean, a different ocean, the Pacific Ocean. And I turned right, and I went in that direction until I got to a city that felt right to me, and that was San Francisco. I'd never been there. I'd heard of it. And then I found a place that was just right. I couldn't afford it, but it didn't matter to me. I rented it anyway because I knew that's where I wanted to be. It was overlooking the San Francisco Bay, and I could see the Bay Bridge, and I could see the bay, and I watched it turn colors every morning and every evening and then every night. And I spent about 13 years in San Francisco, and something really interesting happened to me then. I got invited. Oh, I want to mention one other thing about my life from Harvard onward. I was addicted to sex. I thought it was admirable. It wasn't until quite a bit later that I realized there wasn't anything admirable about it. There was no intimacy. There was no connection. There was no relating. I thought it's the most intimate way you can relate. I've discovered if there's no love, if there's no presence, if there's no honoring of the other, it's the least intimate way it's possible to relate, because all involved are using the other to satisfy their own cravings that come from the same inadequacy and self-loathing that I was experiencing without being able to use those words. So that was the context. In San Francisco, my life was one of riding motorcycles, experimenting with drugs, sex with women, and wondering about where the monthly miracle of the rent would come from. When I got invited to a meeting at the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory in Berkeley, California. Now, the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory is one of the premier physical research centers in the world, or it was at the time. It's still a major player. It's got a cyclotron, and I got invited to a meeting of physicists on a Friday afternoon by this wonderful woman, Elizabeth Rauscher. And she called her group the Fundamental Physics Group, and she spelled it FYSICS. And I went because I wanted to see what a physicist looked like. And they were discussing that afternoon using English, using qualitative discourse rather than discussing mathematical formalisms. And the question they were discussing is, are we experimenting with the reality? Are we creating the reality that we are experimenting with? That was not a new question for me. My group of people who were just like me, which means intellectual, arrogant, isolated, and looking at others as others, was discussing it in coffee shops in North Beach, except this was not a coffee shop conversation. These were world-renowned theoretical physicists. And I went home so excited, I couldn't articulate what was exciting me. I felt like I had 3 cups of cappuccino. So I began to read. And then I asked the group if I could come back. And they were very gracious. They said yes. And I started coming every Friday. And I started to be able to understand a little bit of what was exciting to me. And then I had the idea to write a book, because I knew I wasn't going to be interested in physics indefinitely. And I wanted to share what I was learning. And so I wrote a book for non-physicists like me, liberal arts majors who didn't like science, never had an interest in mathematics, but were interested in this thing called quantum mechanics. And I wrote it with the help of these physicists, a lot of help from them. They said yes. They only asked one thing of me. They said, get it right. Get it factually, historically, conceptually correct. And I did, with their help. And it was instantly reviewed in the New York Times, which was the premier literary, if you want to call the New York Times literary, but their book section is literary. And the review was a rave review. Now, if I hadn't followed the hunch to ask if I could go to this meeting, I wouldn't have met these physicists, I wouldn't have become excited, and I wouldn't have written this book, and I wouldn't have been raved about in the New York Times. So you can see my life as a boy in Kansas is beginning to change. But it wouldn't have if I hadn't seen what was, or responded to what I felt was meaningful. And that's what I'm suggesting to you. These are my experiences. And I'm pointing them out simply to show you what I registered as meaningful. Now, by register, I don't mean thinking, oh, this is meaningful. Oh, this is very meaningful. No, it was just a hunch. I noticed an impulse to go in this direction instead of another. So I tried it. I'd gone in a lot of directions before in my life, but all of them were given to me by frightened parts of my personality. This one came from another place. It felt good, and it produced amazing consequences that felt good and constructive. And that's something I want to share with you too. That as you follow impulses from loving parts of your personality, they create constructive consequences, not destructive and painful consequences. Now, here's the heart of this part of the story. I set about writing that book, and I wrote an outline for every chapter, but I threw the outlines away as soon as I started writing because I never written before, so I didn't know how it was supposed to be done. But I knew I wanted to follow the energy. Here's another example of following something that's meaningful. The outline was well planned out. It was logical. It was sound. It was all of that. But the energy went somewhere else, and I started to write about somewhere else. And about 6 months later, I noticed that all the chapters I had written, 6 of them, began to fit together, not began, fit together perfectly. Perfectly. How did that happen? I threw away the outlines. I didn't do that. And that's when I realized that I wasn't alone in this project. That's when I discovered non-physical reality. I'd had experiences of it early in my life. You may have had some too. But I didn't think of them as out of the ordinary. Miracles don't usually seem out of the ordinary. They seem ordinary when they happen to you. So I followed my impulses of what was meaningful. And that led me to my first experiences of non-physical reality that I could not ignore, and I knew what they were when I had them. The next thing that happened was, after the book was published and I could look back on it, I realized that was my first gift to life. I was in my mid-30s.
Sorry, we were about to get to that question. So it's like you're channeling all of us. I was about to ask, how do you believe if your hunches are pointing in the right direction? And you answered that. I was thinking that loud. And then we were thinking of your book as the first gift of life as well. So I'm just going to invite Parag Bhai and have him seed that question so we can hear a little more about that.
Thank you, Gary. What a colorful landscape of your early life. And just thinking of this constructive contribution, I'm curious to know that why do you call it the first gift of life, your first book, Dancing Woolly Master? Can you share a little bit about your inner landscape from which this book emerged?
I don't call it my first gift to life. It was my first gift to life.
That's nice.
Everything in my life to that moment was about me, and more me. What I wanted, what I needed, what I thought about me, how I used people, how I used women, how they used me, and I used them using me. Everything was for me, what I could get. And I was always frightened that I couldn't get enough. But this idea to write the book was so exciting to me, Parag. It just filled me with excitement, almost like the first conversation with the physicist did, the idea of writing the book. And the experience of giving my first gift to life, because it was my first experience of it, and I liked it. I'm not saying that my life changed in that moment, but it was a big first. And I decided something else as I was writing the book, that I decided to live my life the way this book was being written, which was spontaneously, intelligently, joyfully. And I've gone a little ways down that road. It feels good. It feels real good. So I've gone from a motorcycle riding paratrooper who was addicted to sex and went to Vietnam to kill, to somebody who loves people and likes sharing, like now. And I also made a decision never to have any of the energy of a frightened part of my personality enter into a book or an event like this one. Because the ability to talk to someone else is too precious to share that. It's designed to share love. That's why it feels so good to do it.
From fear to love was the transition for you through the first book. And I understand then you spent some long years, around 10 years in wilderness of Shastra, mostly in solitude, without much contact with the outside world, or watching any TV or news. So much so that when Oprah called you, you did not know who she was or what TV program she is talking about. Can you share in brief a little bit about that phase of life in your time in wilderness of Sasta?
Oprah did call a few times. And of course, I hadn't seen her show. I lived in a little town in a mountain community, Mount Shasta, California. And I had a television, but I just used it for playing movies. And so when Oprah called, she had to explain what she did and who she was. And about the third time, she didn't call, but one of her producers called. And he said, would you like to come to Chicago and do an interview with Miss Winfrey? Not a show, just a 5-minute segment, because she had 5-minute segments in called Remembering Your Spirit. And when he asked me that, I'm not going to say it's a vision because that sounds mystical. It wasn't a vision. I just had this thought. I could see something. It was as though I were a surfer, and I was and I was on a surfboard, and a wave had just arrived, and I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to paddle to catch it. I didn't have to wait for it. All I had to do was stand up and ride. Wow. And I knew the ride was going to take me a long way. So I called Linda, who was in San Diego, and told her about the invitation. And I said, what do you think? And she said, let's go. And she said, of course, we're going. So I met her in Chicago, and we met Oprah in this apartment close to Harpo Studios. It wasn't a show. And she had a couple of cameramen there to record our conversation. And she also brought her staff, not the whole of Harpo, but her senior people that she worked with so closely. And it turned out that she had been teaching everyone in Harpo about, which was her company, about the seat of the soul for years. And so we had this conversation. First of all, we formed a circle and we had a moment of silence, just like we started with on this call. And then she started asking me questions, and I started answering them as well as I could. And when it was over, we just had this great conversation. And she said, well, when she saw me the first time, I was wearing my only Italian suit. Linda and I had gone to Europe to see some friends. And I thought, before I go back, I'm going to buy an Italian suit. I just had the impulse to do that. Well, that's another following an impulse. And I did. And it was really good looking, except there was no place in this little mountain community to wear it. This is full of loggers. And so I took my Italian suit, and Linda and I went to Chicago, and I wore my suit. And after we talked for a little while, Oprah looked at me and said, look at him. I can put him on television. I knew in that moment that she expected me to look like a logger, to have a plaid shirt and suspenders and a pot belly hanging over my belt and carrying a chainsaw. And then she said, about the conversation we just had, she said, I'm going to give this as a gift to my viewers, a Christmas gift. And she did. She aired it on Christmas Eve afternoon in '98.
Beautiful.
Now, I'm asking all of you who are listening, don't think about how dramatic this may sound to you. It didn't sound dramatic. It didn't feel dramatic to me. It was just what my life was offering. And I accepted, not because I wanted to be on this person's television show, but because looking in this direction and experimenting with this felt meaningful to me. And she told me early, Gary, your life is never going to be the same. That did not register. I was living in the backcountry, spending a lot of time on a mountain. But what happened was, well, the first thing that happened was 4 months later, she called again. And she said, well, the Seat of the Soul had gone to #1 on the New York Times bestseller list.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Well, how did that happen? And I hadn't quite made the connection that just being with this woman in a studio could cause that to happen. And she said, well, Mr. New York Times bestseller, how do you feel? I said, well, good, I guess. And she said, we're going to do another show. And she told me what it was about. And I said, oh, that sounds good. I'm going to watch that. And she said, no, Gary, you're going to be on it. And I was. And that was my first studio show with Oprah. And we both liked it so much that we did quite a few of them. And I really enjoyed them because Oprah loved talking about significant things. And she has a wonderful ability, as anyone who's seen her when she was on national TV, to elicit the very heart of whatever her guest has to say, and to be sensitive to questions that her audience has that the guest has not answered. So we had a grand time.
Indeed. No, I was about to say, even in her words, she mentions that this book was one of the first ways in which in fact, it changed the way she saw her life. And she says it in her own words. And when I read the fact that Oprah called you and you said, oh, can you spell your name? Is it Opra? And she said, yes, H for the silent. I couldn't imagine but laugh and wonder what is that inner space that you must be in when you were in solitude. And I'm sure so much may have emerged for you, right? 10 years is not a short amount of time. And it's interesting to see how you say that you've had impulses from the loving part of your journeys. And it's not at all dramatic, it's so visual. And it's very evident, as we also spoken, that during those years in the Shastra, you've had even more interesting encounters, as I may say, that have been hunches or impulses. One of which I remember distinctly is you talking about meeting a Chinese teacher who has been a significant influence in your life. It reminds me, actually, I live with a 10-year-old. And so the first thing that I remembered when I heard of that was the movie Kung Fu Panda. And there is this Shifu in the movie, and he comes with this very calm, gentle presence and says, there are no accidents. And I think everything that you've shared so far is such an evident example of that statement. There are no accidents. But I know I've heard some interesting stories of your encounters with this teacher, and we'd love for you to share it with all our listeners.
Oh, that is a pleasure. That is pure pleasure. I had it wasn't 10 years of solitude. I lived in Mount Shasta for 13 years, the same number of years I had lived in San Francisco. And before San Francisco, I never lived anywhere more than 18 months. So a lot of things did happen in Mount Shasta. One of them was I met this John Abbott, and I went down to see him, and it became a very important part of my life, again, because something seemed meaningful to me. I was writing The Dancing Woolly Masters. That was actually in San Francisco. And I wanted a story about Indra's net. And so I knew that there was a monastery in San Francisco where they were translating from Sanskrit to English. And so I went there and asked them if I could use that translation. And they said, well, we're not finished with it yet, but you can when we finish it. And because of that, I got invited later to go to a big monastery in Northern California. It was called the City of 10,000 Buddhas. And the first thing a lot of things happened there over the next couple of years. But I think the one you're talking about is there was a lecture on the first night. And it was a big lecture because it turns out people from all over Southeast Asia had come to be with this Chan master. They'd flown from Singapore, from Malaysia. But I didn't know who he was. And he was explaining a sutra, and I missed the first part of it. So the next day I asked one of the monks, could I talk to the abbot? I missed the first part of his lecture, and I'd like to ask him what he said. And the monk looked at me with a blank look on his face. And I think no one had ever asked anything like that, because the abbot is so venerated. So he said he'd ask. And the abbot said, okay. And so I went to see the abbot, who speaks Chinese. And so we're talking through a translator, and the abbot asked me, among other things, do you have a girlfriend? And I said, I do. And he said, well, you should get married. And I thought, no, this is not something this person should be advising me about. And so I told the abbot, I'm afraid there's nothing I can do. I'm afraid I can't make the abbot happy about that. And the translator spoke to the abbot spoke to the translator, and the translator turned to me and said, the abbot says there's nothing you can do to make the abbot happy. I saw something I'd never seen before. I realized I was talking to a presence unlike any I'd ever seen. It wasn't mystical. It was simply, I knew I was talking to someone who could not be manipulated. I couldn't manipulate him. Nothing in the world could manipulate this presence. So that's one of the wonderful things that's happened to me. And again, it happened because I felt something was meaningful, a story that I wanted to put into the Dancing Wooly Masters. But I didn't just have that thought and think, well, it's not going to work. I found the address of this monastery in the Mission District. I drove down, I asked the monk, and I got invited to this large and major Buddhist center in Northern California. Well, there's so many things that happened in Mount Shasta. I can tell you one of them. Along the way, I got adopted into a Lakota Sioux family, and that means into Sioux culture. And I did that because my Sioux brother, who also adopted me, met me at a conference in Sweden, the Campaign for the Earth conference, and said, would you like to work with me, do some things with Native American youth? Well, the very presence of these guys, because they're wearing feathers and vests and beads and braids, and except for Phil, his hair is frizzy like Einstein's. And I said yes. That was another example of acting on something that was meaningful to me. I didn't know what I could possibly contribute to Native American teenagers, but I said yes. And I drove to a YMCA camp in the mountains to the east of San Diego, where this gathering was happening. And it's at that place that I met Phil's dad, Lekshi. That's Phil Lane Sr. That's the Sioux word for, a fond word for uncle. So I met him, and that was wonderful from the start. On the way out, two young people were driving me from the airport in San Diego, and I said, I've heard that if you honor someone, you should give them tobacco. They said, yeah. And I said, well, I'd like to do that. How can I do that? So they pulled off the road into a 7-Eleven, and we bought some tobacco. And we put it in a little piece of cloth, and we got in the car again. And then I asked him, what should I tell him when I give him the tobacco? And they said, why do you want to honor him? I said, well, because he's an elder. He's Phil's dad, and he does things with Native American youth. And they said, tell him that. So we went and I met him. And he looked like the cowboy, not the Indian. He's wearing a Stetson and a cowboy shirt and a big silver buckle on his belt and razor sharp creases in his jeans and boots. But I couldn't tell him those things that night. We just met and it was getting dark. So we went to sleep. And the next morning, Phil and his dad and I were walking in the sunshine to the first meeting. And I thought, well, it's now or never. So I said, Mr. Lane, I want to give you this. And I told him why. And I gave him this little tobacco pouch. And I thought he was going to say, oh, washte. But instead he said, why, this hasn't happened to me in years. You know, in the old days, young people used to give the elders tobacco. And he melted my heart. I was his. And he was in my life for the last 10 years of his life. And after I met Linda, he adopted her too. And we used to go to visit them, him and his wife in Walla Walla, Washington. And I decided I'd always been interested in a vision quest. So I asked him, will you help me have a vision quest? Here again is something I want you to pay attention to, not my experiences, but your experiences. Your experiences, anyone that you have a hunch, no matter how slight, that's a good place to go. Not that you need to go there because that's where the money is, that's where the fame is, that's where the new mountain bike is, but something else, a hunch that says, follow that. So Lekshi said he would. And for some time, he helped me prepare on the telephone. He was in Washington and I was in Mount Shasta. And he would tell me things like, let yourself melt into the Creator's tenderness. Just those words have never left me. I never thought of any religion that has made me feel that way about the divine. Let yourself melt, nephew, into the Creator's tenderness. So I decided I'm going to do this vision quest. And it didn't just happen. I had to make it happen. It was work. I spent an entire summer hiking around Mount Shasta. It's a big mountain, looking for a vision quest site. And I couldn't find any. There's so many clear cuts on that mountain that are hidden from public view. And there are lots of scenic, beautiful places, but they weren't the place. And then one day I decided I was just exploring with my old truck, and I went on a side of the mountain I seldom went to. And I found not a dried up creek, but a dried up an old logging road. And after lots of years, the rocks, big rocks, start to come up out of the ground if a road isn't graded and maintained every year. And this one wasn't for a long time. So I was bumping over it, wondering, where is this going? But I wanted to go where it was going and see what was at the end. And when I got to the end, I was startled. It was a trailhead. The Forest Service had put a sign there. Obviously, no one had been there in a long time, but there wasn't a trail. So I started walking and feeling which way I should go. So this way, up, and this way, over an open area, and this way, along a ravine, and this way, and then I found it. I found my place. I found the mission, the Vision Quest site that I would use. The trees in it felt like a cathedral, and it was so peaceful. and it invited me. And I felt safe, really safe there. People had been there before, a long time before, I could tell. Maybe generations earlier. But that's when the work began. So I went back down, and the next several days, I went back to that side of the mountain collecting sage. There's a particular kind of sage that grows on that side of Mount Shasta, until I filled a large bag that usually is used for gathering leaves in the fall. I filled it with sage. It was work. And then when I was ready for the vision quest, I prayed, I meditated, talked to Lekshi, and then I drove my truck back to this place. And I had some water with me, had a little food for after the vision quest when I break the fast. And I went back to this place and I got it set up. And I made a circle out of the sage that I had harvested. And I put my things outside the circle, except some water. And I took the food and I put it in a little bag and hoisted it with the cords up a tree to a branch high enough so that a bear couldn't get to it. And I went in the circle and I closed it. And that's where I stayed for the vision quest. And it was big enough for me. I'm going to guess it's about 3 times my height in diameter, this circle. And at midday, when the sun was directly overhead, no part of the circle was in the shade, and it was hot. And I started to feel very tired. And I thought, why am I feeling this way? I've been on a week-long fast before, and this is only the second day. But I could barely move. So I lay down in a fetal position with my back against the sage circle. And I couldn't move. I was so tired and so hot. And I felt as though I were a mother with her child. And they were both dying of hunger. And her mother, the mother, I couldn't sort it out. The mother, I couldn't move. I didn't have the strength to move my arm to touch my child who was starving in front of me. Its stomach was distended. There were flies on its eyes. And I couldn't do anything. And then I became all the starving mothers with their starving children. And it was horrible. So after I left the vision quest, I closed the circle and cleaned up and walked down. And I called Lekshi, and he started asking me, what happened? What'd you experience? I told him this happened, that happened, that happened. But when I told him about this, he stopped me. And he said, oh, Toshka, nephew, now you're talking like a man. And that shifted my understanding of masculinity forever. Now, this would have not happened. I'm not telling you this because it was a wonderful experience for me. but to show you that it happened because I did the work. The experiences were not life-changing experiences. They were experiences that gave me a glimpse into a vista of greater potential and scope and meaning and depth. But if I hadn't said, I'm going to drive to that side of the mountain and in the heat of the day, harvest sage for an afternoon. If I hadn't said, I'm going back there again and I'm going to carry all this up to my place in the mountain, I wouldn't have had those experiences, but I did. Well, those are some of the things that happened in Mount Shasta.
I think from whatever I've spoken to you, it just feels your life has been a series of these sacred moments, and the spirit is deeply special. We all felt in you. So thank you for sharing. And we actually have a special surprise for you. And I want to share a little. When you were sharing about your experiences in Shasta, I couldn't help but think that there's so much sacred that continually evolves in the journey. And to just go a little back in time, 3 years ago, I remember this moment very clearly. We were sitting on the prayer ground in the Gandhi ashram in Ahmedabad, and we were all in a circle. And Masami Sayonji, who's also one from the royal families of Japan, she had an incredible moment of sharing, and you and her, both of you, had this very sacred look in each other's eyes. It's so clear. I don't know what conversation emerged, but I could think of that sacred in India, to witness that. So from that space of sacred in India, we have a special message from the land of Gandhi Ashram, and I would like to request our tech angels to share that with all of us and with you.
Namaste. Love Jagat.
Namaste, namaste.
आपका स्मरण करता हूँ तब मुझे वार्मथ मिलती है, एकदम सहज प्यार मिलता है. आपकी प्रेजेंस ही वार्मथ देती है, प्यार देती है. और आप दोनों जो भलाई के भाव से, दुनिया की भलाई, उस भाव से जो दुनिया में प्यार फैला रहे हो, उससे बहुत बड़ा काम होता है. आप कितना प्यार से सुनते हो, कितना प्यार से अप्रिशिएट करते हो. आपका हृदय खुला हुआ है, मन खाली है, इसलिए बहुत बड़ा काम आप कर रहे हो. आपका आज स्मरण करने का मौका मिला, मैं परमात्मा की कृपा मानता हूँ. वी आर ब्लेस्ड. आप जैसे एंजल्स हमारे जीवन में आए, आप जैसे दोस्त हमें, नोबल फ्रेंड हमें मिले. थैंक यू वेरी मच. आई एम सो ग्रेटफुल. लव यू माय डियर. थैंक यू.
That's
Oh. Oh, I love seeing his face. I love hearing his voice. That is Jayesh. That is Nipun's colleague, co-creator. I love him. Just like I love you. And we all met together in India in Ahmedabad at a beautiful campus that Jayesh has created. So please tell him that when I read his words, because they were shown to me, I felt he was describing himself.
indeed.
Indeed. And thank you for that. Thank you so much. That is a gift beyond measure. As you know, if you've read Universal Human, I took 3 people that I know as examples of emerging universal humans. Jayesh, who just gave us this beautiful message, is one of them. And Masami Sayonji from Japan, whom you have also mentioned, is another. And the third is Nipun Mehta, who is one of the
Indeed, in
founders
fact,
of Service Space.
sorry. Indeed, I was actually about to say that all of these names have been featured in your book, which is actually my last question before we go to the audience questions. We wanted to touch on that subject, universal human, and we wanted to have you share a little about the idea of universal human. Indeed, it is such an inspiring idea, and it's really needed today. If I'm not mistaken, also, and correct me if I'm wrong, I remember you even spoke about this at the Gandhi ashram, and you mentioned that the last chapter of this book was something that came to you in those powerful moments. So anyways, can you talk about more about this, the book and the intention of universal human?
I would love to, except if I may, I would like to talk about another emerging universal human that I met in Mount Shasta, and that is my spiritual partner, Linda Francis. And I want to tell you about her too, because this is also, meeting Linda was also a turning point in my life, not because I met Linda, but because I decided to act on things that I was drawn to, and that was not Linda. I had no attraction to Linda when I first met her. In fact, it was a New Age meeting, and there was a lot of hugging going on. But I didn't want to get hugs from this particular person. But we started to get, and we were at a little retreat together. But we started to be put together, and I got to know her a little bit. And I didn't want to be with her, but I was being put with her. And I had experiences with her that were really very different. For example, she gave me a long hug once, and it was very exciting. Well, I'm a man, and so when you get exciting, it's a little bit hard to hide when someone's giving you a full body hug for 2 minutes. So I tried to stop that from happening, and I hurt myself. I felt a pain at the base of my spine that was excruciating. And I had to sit down and think, not sit down, but I had to think about it. And I did a lot. And when I figured out what happened, I wanted to tell Linda. And what I realized was this, that I lived in this small town in Kansas, which had one highway running through it, 2 lanes. And while I was living there, the state put a bypass around my little town. And that's exactly what I tried to do with my sexuality. I tried to put a bypass around it. Because Sherfu was celibate, but it served him. I was celibate because I was frightened of my sexuality. So I told Linda. And by the end of the retreat, I'd gotten to know her a little bit. And everyone said, well, we're going, at the end of the retreat, look, we're going to a waterfall, Gary. You want to bring Linda? And I got annoyed. I said, Linda, 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 why is everything Linda? No, I don't want to bring Linda. I think I did, but I didn't like being associated with Linda. And then she moved to Mount Shasta. And not because I was there. She didn't want to move there for a man. She almost didn't move there because I was there. But she made a decision to do something that wasn't pleasant for her either. And then we got to know each other. We started to talk in the afternoons now and then. Sometimes I liked being with her, and sometimes I was so uncomfortable. But about 6 months later, I had this thought, I think I'm in a relationship. And I'd never been in one before, so I didn't know what it felt like, but I thought, that's it. And when Linda returned from a short trip to Europe, I had realized I wanted to live with her. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't, you complete me. It was just, I wanted to be with this person. I didn't want her to be in her little cabin, and I was in my little cabin. And she discovered the same thing. So we moved into my little cabin. And being with Linda has been the most growth-filled experiences I could imagine, because everything that I share, I had to practice with her. And we lived together. And that means experiencing frightened parts of my personality and not acting on it. The Army required a lot of courage for me, and I still have a lot of courage, but I use it in a new way. I never found anything in the Army or any place else in life that took as much courage as ending a power struggle in me, not having the last word. And I've experienced so much with Linda. And I'm experiencing all of these things. She's a treasure. Well, you are a treasure, Meghna. You are a treasure, Parag. Nipun is a treasure. Everyone who's listening here is a treasure. Once you revere life, once you're in love with life, you can't revere a part of it more than another. It just happens. But I wanted to tell you about Linda because that is a major part of the arc of my life, as Nipun was talking. And it didn't happen because I saw Linda and was attracted to her. It took work. I wasn't attracted to her, but there was something that told me I should maybe talk with her. Maybe I should share this deep insight that I'd had about myself. Maybe I should talk with her now and then in the afternoon when she moved to Mount Shasta. And none of the things that have happened in the way of the events that we've created together, or the things that we've co-created and co-contributed, would not have happened. And I'm not going to say because I met Linda. I am going to say because I met Linda and I followed in me meaning, not anything except meaning. And that's why I'm spending this time with you, because you're living a precious few moments. Your life in the Earth School. Your life, pardon me.
No. In fact, I wanted to say that one of our guest listeners actually has a follow-up question on that thought. And I'm just going to invite Bradley to share that question, which is so an actual connection with what you're sharing with your co-creation with Linda. So Bradley, go for it.
Hi, Gary. Thank you very much for your talk. I was reading in Heart of the Soul. I think this is a question that Megan's referring to. And in there, you talk about taking an inventory and thinking about why you do things. And so as I was doing that today and thinking about why I do certain things, sometimes the reasons aren't satisfying. And so I wonder if I need to think deeper, or are there times when you just have to let it go? Maybe if I can't come up with a good reason, it's like, oh, maybe that's something that I don't need to follow, sort of.
That's a good question. Following your heart doesn't have anything to do with your mind. So there's no sense trying to figure it out. But you can use your body to tell you whether this is constructive for you to follow or not. And by use your body, I mean put your attention in your throat, your chest, and your solar plexus. Whenever you have an experience of pushing away or that you think might be an experience is coming from fear, like anger, or like greed, or like vengeance, or like getting even, or like feeling superior and entitled, or like feeling inferior and needing to please. If you find painful physical sensations like a throbbing, churning, burning, stabbing, aching, then you know you're in a frightened part of your personality. And if you're there, the intention that you will act on comes from fear, and it will create destructive and painful consequences. Your body will not lie to you. And that book, by the way, The Heart of the Soul, Emotional Awareness, was co-authored by Linda. I wrote most of the text, but she wrote the heart of it. She created the exercises. And I'd like you to know that if you're like me and you have an intellectual tendency, you might want to read the book and skip the exercises. That won't take you very far. The farthest it will take you is you'll know a lot about emotional awareness, but you won't be emotionally aware. And that's what you need to create authentic power. So Bradley, it's a wonderful question. Don't try to figure it out. Feel it. Put your attention in your chakra areas, and especially these three, because those are the easiest for me, anyway, to feel physical sensations. And the thoughts that accompany that fear will be judgmental, comparative, derogatory. For example, he's so stupid, or I'm so stupid. These are all experiences of fear. And when you recognize them and you set the intention not to act in that energy, and it'll be attractive, it'll be magnetic, it'll be demanding. He's wrong. Tell him he's wrong. How could he do that to me? How could she do that to me? Whatever it is that the frightened part sees, it will believe. And I hope you're still here, Bradley, but that is the way you can create authentic power, by not acting on that part of your personality while you're feeling it, and instead acting from a loving part of your personality, a part of your personality that is grateful or appreciative or caring or patient or content or in awe of the universe. And even if in that moment you can't put yourself in that part, you can at least remember that you have that part, that you had it at one time. And when you do that, you turn yourself in a different direction. You turn yourself toward love. And when you do that again and again and again, that frightened part of your personality loses its control over you. And love starts to become more a part of your awareness. That's how you create authentic power. That's how you grow spiritually. No matter what context, this is the dynamic of inner transformation. You have to know what you want to change. You have to be able to identify it, and you have to use your will. You have to make a responsible choice when you're in the grip or the experience of fear. A choice that will create consequences for which you are willing to assume responsibility.
That is beautiful, Gary. So on the same line, I have a question from Tammy. She is asking, in making that long journey from head to heart, can you share a practice for connecting with the heart of compassion and reverence beyond an intellectual decision to be compassionate? Perhaps you can share something from your experience, how you have done it.
Well, my Sioux uncle told me once, nephew, the longest journey you're going to make in your life is from here to here. But I had no idea at the time how long that journey would be and how difficult. And the journey is taken. Timmy, hi.
Hi, Gary. It's nice to see you here.
Nice to see you. The way that journey looks is always the same, whether you're Hindu, whether you're Catholic, whether you're Buddhist, whether you are Xhosa, whether you are Cherokee. You have to become aware of your emotions. because we're multisensory now. That means we're in a great transformation in human consciousness that's unprecedented and epic. And it allows us to see things and experience things we've not experienced before. Like ourselves is more than minds and bodies. Like power is the alignment of the personality with the soul. And as you learn how to do that, how to develop emotional awareness, which is what Bradley and I were just talking about, as you learn how to make responsible choices, even while you're angry or jealous or vengeful, that's how you move beyond the control of the frightened parts of your personality. And as you do, you cultivate the loving parts. When I challenge my impatience, I'm cultivating my patience. That takes courage. It takes courage because experiencing a frightened part of your personality, like one that wants to be in a power struggle and not entering the power struggle or stopping the power struggle, and instead looking inside yourself, is painful. The first thing you find when you look inside yourself is painful physical sensations. And those are the sensations that are driving you outward into the world to say, you're wrong. You've got the wrong belief. You are a bigot. You are selfish. You are all the judgments that frightened parts of personalities have. But when you challenge that part of your personality, whatever it is, and you feel it instead, now you're cooking with gas. You go nowhere when you try to change the world, because events in the world do not cause your emotional pain. They activate internal experiences, internal dynamics in you that create the experiences of emotional pain or joy. So when you look inward instead of outward, now you've got some traction. You're changing yourself. You're changing the origin of these experiences. And that is creating authentic power. And that is what frees you to give the gifts that you were born to give. And that's where your meaning and fulfillment and joy enter your life. Thank you so much, Temi. It's a beautiful question.
Thank you, Gary. Good to see
Thank
you.
you, Tammy.
Thank you.
Now I will invite Saroj for the last question from the audience.
Hi, Gary. Thank you so much for your wonderful talk. It's just great to hear you. Your voice, you're just so soothing and wonderful. I have a question, and it's comes from ignorance, I think, mostly. And the question is, you've written various places, and you talk about we need every action, thought, and feeling is motivated by intention, and we need to watch our intention. But the question is kind of confusing, because isn't intention same thing as thought and feeling? So how can I watch my intention without the thought coming in first? So it's kind of a confusing situation for me, at least. So just wanted a little more clarification.
An intention is a quality of consciousness. Some people, it is a quality of consciousness that infuses your actions and your words. For example, someone might say, well, here's a nonprofit that I like, and I'm going to write a check to this nonprofit. That's my intention. Well, ask yourself, why are you doing that? And you say, well, because they help people in Africa who don't have water have a well. You say, well, why do I want to help people in Africa who don't have water have a well? And you keep saying, why? Well, why am I writing this check? Is it to get a tax deduction? That's from fear. That's an intention of fear. Is it to get a better self-image of myself? That's an intention of fear. Is it to have people think that I'm generous? That's an intention of fear. Is it because I want to help people anywhere who are thirsty get some water? And these people are doing that. And so I want to support them in doing that. That comes from the heart. No strings attached. As you create authentic power, like I've discussed with Bradley and with Temi, you are moving in a direction, and that direction is taking you to a destination. And that destination is this. You are becoming a presence in the earth school that moves and creates with an empowered heart without attachment to the outcome. So when you develop emotional awareness, you will be able to know when fear is active in you. And every frightened part of your personality has the same intention. It's to manipulate and control the external world, to change somebody or something or some situation. And that will lead you to painful and destructive consequences. And when you check inside yourself and you find warm, good feeling sensations, the kind you want more of, and your thoughts are appreciative and grateful, acting on that energy will always be acting with the intention of love. And you will always experience those intentions for several reasons, and one of them is the law of karma.
Mhm.
In other words, intention creates consequences in your life, not your actions, not your words, but the intentions behind them. And once you know those intentions, you can start to create a life of bliss and joy. But in my experience, it's not going to happen overnight.
Mhm.
Creating authentic power is a process, not an event. But creating authentic power will take you places that only love can take you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you.
Saroj.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Gary.
much, Saroj.
Well, Gary, we are just heading to the conclusion of our time together. But if you are open to 10 minutes, we would love to end a couple of rapid fire quick questions with quick answer, and then we go to the closing.
Let's go.
Thank you. We are honored. So, the first question I will start with, what is your favorite poem of Maya Angelou?
I have so many.
Oh.
One of the favorite poem by Maya Angelou, right? Yeah,
Yes.
she wrote a poem called "Phenomenal Woman," which is phenomenal. It's just one of the wonderful poems. She wrote so many. When Great Trees Fall, but that's a start.
Wonderful. So I love the fact that you're giving quick, rapid answers. So here's my question. Next question. What's a lesson that your kids have taught you?
I only have one. I got some grandchildren. But the lesson is, if you love someone, tell them. Don't wait. I was separated from my daughter at birth. And I started to have this feeling. I wonder where she is. I wonder who she is. And so I started to do my best to find out. And I finally did. And when I found out where she was, and I had her phone number, that was really scary. So I prepared myself for anything, that she might be a professor or a secretary or a drug addict. But it didn't matter. I wanted to meet her. So I wanted to tell her that I love her. I didn't even know her. So I didn't say that, but I wanted to make myself available to her. And I did. And it's brought great richness into my life. And by the way, I know that the parent-child relationship is, the child-parent relationship is the most difficult in the Earth School. But I missed a lot of that with my daughter. But I got a lot of that with our granddaughters. And so that was a joy. But grandparents always have an easier time of it.
I agree. I'm seeing that. I agree.
So the next is, what is the best piece of advice you have ever received?
What is the best what?
Piece of advice you have ever received?
Be gentle with yourself.
Awesome.
Wonderful. We'll have two more questions and then we have a beautiful closing as well, Gary. We have a very special friend, another friend who will offer closing. But yes, my next question is, can you, when you get tired, what do you do to rejuvenate yourself?
It depends on where the fatigue comes from. Even the best of us get tired. So if you need to rest, rest. Take care of yourself. Sometimes fatigue comes from fear. And fatigue from fear requires your experiencing that fear and challenging it in exactly the ways that we've been talking about it. And challenging it. That doesn't mean have a battle with it. It just means experience it fully. Never suppress or repress or deny an emotion. Experience it fully and then choose not to be controlled by it. But I can tell you see, another way of saying the same thing is you will never be fatigued in that way if you are passionate about what you are doing. Passion fills you with energy, with creativity, with openness. And as you create authentic power and you use meaning as your guide, you begin to follow your passion. That's another way of saying when you register something that's meaningful to you, follow it, explore it, because it's going to lead you to passion. It's going to lead you to love. It's going to lead you to fulfillment. It's going to lead you to authentic power.
Okay. And the last one, the most recent book you have read that has moved you, touched you deeply.
The most what?
Recent book.
Recent book. Oh, well, that makes it easy. Universal Human.
That's nice.
Linda and I are reading it together every night, one chapter at a time. So I like it, by the way.
Yeah.
I feel, and I don't mean that flippantly, I feel so good about that book.
Awesome.
I feel satisfied with it.
Yeah.
It's a real joy to have shared everything in it.
Thank you, Gary, for this beautiful dialogue. We feel honored to be with you on this Sunday morning. Just thinking of our last 90 minutes, I am deeply inspired by the journey of co-creation of Universal Human unfolded in front of my eyes and ears. And, any closing words you would like to share with all our listeners in a minute or so?
I am so honored to be with you. I'm so thrilled. I don't feel there's any gift that can compare with the gift of your presence. And I feel your presence. I know I'm looking at a monitor. I know it's the internet, but the internet is not what's bringing us together. The internet is a physical manifestation of our growing awareness of how connected we are. And everything depends upon intention. And our intention in coming together this evening, my time, this morning, your time, is to remind us, even with that beautiful symbolism of yin and yang, night and day, good and bad, to share from the heart, with the heart, through the heart, all that the heart wants to share. That was
Thank
longer than I
you.
thought it would be.
Anyway, thank you. And thank you on behalf of all the listeners. And my last question to you is, how can the service-based community support your vision? In any way, if we can serve you, please share.
Oh, what an offer. If you have any, first of all, with your love, like I support you without reservation. If any of you have skills that you could help as we build an ecosystem to support people around the world, interested individuals around the world in creating authentic power and spiritual partnership, please let us know. And it could be just to share your heartfelt support. It could be to share a skill that you have. It could be to share experience that you have. It could be to share with us what you've learned in service space. I will leave it to you. You are focused on helping people experience generosity and responsibility and the fulfillment of putting those two together. So whatever generous impulse you have that has been brought to your awareness by anything that I've shared, please share it with us. I believe that my greatest contribution to service space is my love for it, for Nipun, for you, for the people I'm speaking with. But also, I make a point of, when I picked a few people to be grateful for at the first of Universal Human, and a few people to identify at the end of Universal Human, I did it consciously, picking Jayesh and Masami and Nipun, so that I could, with that book, direct as many people towards service space as are drawn to service space. And so I coupled my love. Well, this is what we've been saying the whole time together, isn't it? Follow what's meaningful to you. Act on it. That's what changes your life, is acting on it. So I can't tell you how to act on it, but you know what's meaningful to you. When it happens, look for it, then experiment with it, then experiment some more with it. That's how you can support us.
Thank you. So we look forward to every possible opportunity to co-create goodness and spread it on this world. Thank you, Gary. So I will call upon Meghna to do the ending.
In fact, Rohit is here to close it all off for us. So thank you. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you so much, Gary. This whole conversation and the arc of your life and the words have been so inspiring, and how you have moved to deeper connection and deeper meaning by setting this intention. And it's also lovely, being in India. This started as an India offering, and it was inspired by Gandhi, especially this Law of Love series. And I'm also inspired by the beautiful connection, and I think the gravitation which you have towards these amazing, remarkable human beings like Gandhi and so many other remarkable social change leaders who have led us the way and really crafted a new possibility, a multisensory possibility, as you say. And in that note, one of the stories I was deeply inspired by, which you briefly mentioned on a previous call, was around your connection with Yogananda, Paramhans Yogananda, a great saint in India. And you recounted a beautiful story from his life where he and his friend went to the Kumbh Mela and met a person, a recluse, an ascetic monk who was actually just living by a small tent with almost nothing to wear, no possessions at all. And he was sitting on the ground, on a ground of straw. And Yogananda and his friend met him and they were just absolutely blown away by the wisdom and by the presence of that person. And after that, as they leave, Yogananda uh, tells his friend that, look at that guy. Uh, this is a guy. This is the king on a throne of golden straw. So, which is something which just really inspired me to look deeper into like, how does a universal human relate to the entire universe and everything and all the people around her. So he has nothing in a way, but he is like a king at all the time, with a heart ever so expansive and graceful and connected. And just to honor that connection, I would like to invite a very dear friend, Jordan, to offer one closing chant, which was written by Yogananda, and it was one of his favorite chants. So if the tech magicians can, put Jordan on spotlight, and she can offer a closing song to mark off our call. And thanks a lot, Gary, and thank you so much, Meghna and Parag, for your wonderful presence and for shining light on these stories, and just, for all that you do with your untiring heart of service. It is such an honor to be in your presence and to learn from you and to see you in action. Thank you so much, everyone. We look forward to, so we'll have this offer ring by Jordan, and then we'll close with a minute of silence in gratitude for all the goodness which has transpired, and it may continue to ripple out.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Gary, for everything that you shared. 1 second, I'm just pulling the music up. Roar of my heart, open wide I keep for thee. Door of my heart, open wide I keep for thee. Wilt thou come, wilt thou come, just for once come to me. Wilt thou come, just for once come to me? Will my days fly away without seeing thee, my Lord? Will my days without seeing thee, my Lord? Night and day, night and day, I look for thee, night and day. Night and day, night and day, I look for thee. Door of my heart, open wide I keep for thee. Door of my heart, open wide for thee. Will thou come, will thou come, just for once come to me? Will thou come, will thou come, just for once come to me? Will my days fly away without seeing thee, my Lord? Will my days fly away without seeing thee, my Lord? Night and day, night and day, I look for thee, night and day. Night and day, I look for thee night and day. Sorry about that. Thank you guys. Sorry if there were moments where I stopped singing, but I've been very emotional today, and it was a little bit hard to get through that song. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Jordan, for that beautiful sacred offering. And just we would like to close with a minute of silence in gratitude. And may we all be agents of the universal love and compassion, and may we all abide by life in the flow of the universal love. Thank you, everyone.